hammered Seattle's industrial district like a warning from the sky. Sirens were silent, streets were empty, and then came the question that would haunt officials for months. How could a foreign cartel build a billion-dollar empire inside one of America's safest cities without anyone noticing? At 4:32 a.m., under flashes of white lightning, black SUVs rolled to a halt beside a steel warehouse along the Duwamish River. Their engines died instantly. Federal agents froze in position. The air tightened. A single command sliced through the darkness: execute. What followed unfolded with the speed of a military breach rather than a police raid. The steel door exploded inward as a hydraulic ram punched through the lock. ICE and DEA teams surged in boots, striking concrete in synchronized rhythm. Flashlights cut through the shadows. Drone lenses glowed overhead, scanning for heat signatures under the warehouse rafters. A suspect bolted up a metal staircase clutching a small bag. Agents intercepted him before he reached the landing. That bag, according to a Justice Department briefing later confirmed by Reuters, carried more than 4 pounds of pure fentanyl, enough to kill more than 1 million people. The raid had barely begun, yet the scale of the threat was already unmistakable. Federal teams tore through rows of barrels labeled cleaning solvent. False panels cracked open, revealing containers packed with crystal meth wrapped and stacked with military precision. Outside, unmarked helicopters hovered low, their searchlights sweeping the rain-soaked pavement. Inside, coded ledgers, encrypted phones, and counterfeit shipping manifests piled up faster than agents could bag them. By sunrise, the numbers were staggering: 465 pounds of meth, 269 pounds of fentanyl, 23 pounds of cocaine, and multiple unregistered firearms. According to federal filings, this warehouse was not an isolated stash. It was a functioning node in an 18-month transnational operation that had quietly threaded itself from Mexico's Sinaloa heartland to Washington state's commercial ports. The scale forced investigators to rethink everything they knew about cartel infiltration. This was no back alley distribution ring. It resembled a corporate supply chain, complete with shell companies, forged invoices, temperature-controlled containers, and drivers equipped with legitimate work badges. Analysts from DHS and the FBI reviewed digital trails showing cryptocurrency payments routed through Canadian and Panamanian shell firms. The sophistication mirrored methods used by state-level espionage, not street-level traffickers. As Donald Trump's administration briefed the media later that morning, federal officials warned that the cartel had engineered a logistics network designed to blend seamlessly into America's trade arteries. But the deeper question was even more alarming. If a foreign criminal syndicate could hide a multi-billion-dollar supply chain inside legitimate commerce, what did that mean for national security? What vulnerabilities inside U.S. ports, trucking routes, and warehouse districts had gone unnoticed? Analysts described the discovery as a silent penetration of American infrastructure, a phrase echoed by The Guardian and DW in their coverage of the raid's aftermath. The implications extended far beyond narcotics. The very systems that kept the U.S. economy moving had been weaponized against it. And then came the human cost. In King County alone, more than 1,000 fentanyl deaths were reported last year, shattering local records. Each dose in the seized stockpile represented a potential life lost: students, veterans, parents, anyone caught in the chain reaction of synthetic opioids. Seattle awoke to images of hazmat suits, seized rifles, and pallets of narcotics under flashing blue lights. As helicopters lifted off and agents transported evidence trucks down Interstate 5, one question lingered over the city. If this was only one warehouse, how many more networks have already slipped into America's blind spots? And what will it take to stop the next one before it strikes? Lightning still flickered over Seattle as federal teams secured the perimeter, but the story of this raid did not begin with the battering ram. It began 18 months earlier with a single anomaly buried in a stack of shipping records. The question that pushed investigators forward was simple yet chilling. How could a container labeled cleaning supplies travel thousands of miles while remaining colder than any normal cargo? That anomaly became the spark that ignited one of the most complex federal hunts in recent U.S. history. The early clues were scattered and unremarkable on their own. A truck swap at a rest stop outside Redding, a container arriving from California with a temperature profile that didn't match its manifest, a pattern of overdoses in King County traced back not to street dealers but to freight shipments listed as domestic household goods. According to internal reports later summarized by BBC News, ICE analysts began flagging these irregularities months before a task force was even established. What they uncovered was not a local distribution ring. It was a logistical web stretching across 3 states, dozens of warehouses, and the commercial ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Seattle. Under the codename Operation Take Back America, more than 250 agents from ICE, the DEA ATF, and the FBI were mobilized. Surveillance teams followed trucks that appeared to carry cleaning products and appliance parts. In reality, those trucks concealed chemical drums packed with methamphetamine and fentanyl. Digital forensics units tracked payments flowing through encrypted messaging apps into crypto wallets controlled by shell companies in Canada and Panama. As Reuters later reported, the sophistication mirrored the financial discipline of an international corporation, not a narcotics gang. Two names kept appearing at the center of the investigation: Rosario Abel Camargo Joaquin Camargo Banuelos and Francisco Fernando Camargo Banuelos. These brothers based in Sinaloa coordinated shipments moving north through California freight hubs into Washington state. Their network used rotating license plates, forged invoices, and strategically positioned warehouses just minutes from Interstate 5. No single truck carried a complete shipment. Pallets were split, rerouted, and recombined to avoid triggering suspicion. With each new data point, federal analysts built a map showing how the operation pulsed like a hidden artery across the Pacific Northwest. Then came the turning point. A seized burner phone in Sacramento revealed coded conversations between US-based distributors and handlers in Culiacan. Those messages unlocked a wave of search warrants. It became clear that agents weren't dealing with a small trafficking cell, they were dismantling a billion-dollar pipeline. According to DOJ filings later verified by The Guardian, the fentanyl seized across the investigation contained enough lethal doses to wipe out the population of multiple major cities. Strategically, the implications were devastating. A cartel had executed a long-term infiltration of America's freight system, exploiting the very efficiency that powered U.S. commerce. By embedding itself inside legitimate supply chains, the network had operated with near invisibility. Security analysts warned that the same tactics could be used for weapons cache smuggling or even foreign intelligence operations. As the Trump administration reviewed early findings, DHS briefers highlighted that the cartel's structure resembled a paramilitary logistics network more than a criminal enterprise. For communities across California, Oregon, and Washington, the human cost was already visible. The synthetic opioids traced through this network had contributed to record overdose spikes, including thousands of deaths reported by state health agencies in 2023 and 2024. Each mislabeled container on I-5 represented another wave of risk traveling silently beneath the surface of everyday life. Families never saw the trucks passing their neighborhoods, but the consequences reached their homes nonetheless. The 18-month hunt had begun with one cold container. It ended with a blueprint exposing how deeply cartels had penetrated American infrastructure. And as federal agents prepared the final strike, another question overshadowed the entire operation. If this pipeline took 18 months to uncover, how many others are still moving undetected across the United States right now? Before dawn broke over Seattle, the raid had already revealed something far more dangerous than narcotics. Hidden behind crates, invoices, and thermal-shielded containers was a system built with such precision that investigators later described it as a cartel-run corporation operating inside the United States. The question now emerging from federal briefings was stark. How could criminal organizations build a logistics empire that functioned like a Fortune 500 company right under America's nose? The deeper agents dug, the more the operation resembled a multinational enterprise rather than a drug ring. Every warehouse had a paper trail. Every shipment had legitimate tax filings. Every shell company had websites, customer service lines, and fabricated employee rosters. According to Reuters and The Guardian, the Sinaloa-linked network in Seattle had imitated the structure of legitimate freight firms so convincingly that it passed through normal trade audits for months without triggering a single red flag. Its leadership understood the rules of U.S. commerce and weaponized them. Temperature-controlled shipping containers masked the chemical density of fentanyl and methamphetamine. Bills of lading listed harmless products like machine parts, kitchen cleaners, and automotive solvents. Drivers carried legitimate port badges and clocked predictable schedules synchronized with real freight movements. Nothing deviated from the rhythm of lawful commerce. That rhythm was the camouflage. The system operated not at the edges of society, but inside the bloodstream of America's trade economy. Investigators later disclosed that the cartel had engineered multi-layered redundancies resembling supply chain safeguards used by major logistics corporations. If one warehouse was compromised, secondary routes were activated through Tacoma rail yards or smaller Oregon freight terminals. If a truck broke down, a clean vehicle was dispatched within minutes to transfer pallets without interrupting the delivery timeline. DW and BBC analysts described the design as shockingly disciplined, a structure built to survive pressure and avoid exposure. Financial architecture added an even more troubling dimension. Cryptocurrency wallets laundered revenue through shell firms registered in Hong Kong, Panama, and Canada. Digital invoices passed through encrypted channels. Bank transfers were split into microtransactions that mimicked consulting fees and equipment purchases. According to U.S. Treasury officials cited by Al Jazeera, the entire system blurred the boundary between global trade and organized crime. It became nearly indistinguishable from legitimate business. Strategically, this placed Washington state at the center of a silent war. The Pacific Northwest had become the perfect breach point. Seattle's port alone processes more than 3.5 million containers annually, an ocean of cargo so vast that even the most rigorous inspectors could only check a fraction. Its proximity to the Canadian border created a two-directional corridor for distribution, and its network of industrial districts, freeways, and rail hubs offered countless spots to hide illegal shipments among legitimate goods. But the vulnerability reverberated far beyond Seattle. Defense analysts reading the raid's findings warned that cartels had achieved something rare: systemic penetration. They didn't attack American security directly, they embedded themselves inside the infrastructure that supports it. Such infiltration, according to experts cited by Jane's Defense Weekly, mimics the tactics used by hostile intelligence services seeking strategic footholds inside a rival nation's economy. For Americans living near ports, rail hubs, or warehouse districts, the human impact was already visible. Thousands of fentanyl deaths, counterfeit pills circulating through schools, and supply chain corruption spreading from the West Coast inward. Families never saw the hidden containers moving through their communities, yet their lives were shaped by the devastation that followed. As federal teams analyzed the seized flash drives and documents, one discovery stood out: a national map color-coded with distribution nodes across 48 U.S. states. It was a blueprint not for one cartel operation, but for a network built to expand. If a criminal enterprise could infiltrate one of America's strongest logistics regions with this level of sophistication, another question now demanded urgent attention. How many more legitimate supply chains across the country are already compromised, and what happens when the next one goes unnoticed? When news of the Seattle raid spread across Washington state, the shock was immediate, but not because of the arrests. It was the numbers behind the drugs. More than 300-400 fentanyl deaths in Washington in 2023, according to state health data later cited by Reuters and BBC. Over 1,000 deaths in King County alone, marking a 67% surge in just 2 years. These weren't abstractions. These were students collapsing in school bathrooms. Veterans found unresponsive in public parks. Parents discovered in suburban homes victims of counterfeit pills laced with doses strong enough to stop breathing in minutes. The raid had exposed the supply chain, but the damage it fueled had already carved itself into the lives of thousands. The crisis no longer felt like an external threat drifting across borders. It had become an internal collapse. Investigators revealed that the cartel's network fed a surge of counterfeit pills resembling over-the-counter pain relievers and anti-anxiety medications. According to DEA testing summarized by The Guardian, 6 out of 10 pills seized nationwide contained lethal amounts of fentanyl. These fake tablets circulated through social media high schools and neighborhood dealers who had no idea what they were distributing. For families across Seattle, the morning after the raid felt less like a victory and more like confirmation of a nightmare long ignored. Then came the political explosion. Seattle is one of America's sanctuary cities, and the moment ICE requested expanded access to local logistics data, the mayor refused. According to DW and Al Jazeera, reporting city officials argued that opening local databases to federal agents would undermine civil protections and threaten immigrant communities. Federal authorities countered that the refusal jeopardized national security during a synthetic opioid emergency. What had started as a drug investigation swiftly turned into a constitutional collision, a battle between local autonomy and federal responsibility. By midday, protesters crowded the steps of Seattle City Hall. One side held signs reading "Protect Our City," demanding deeper cooperation with ICE and the DEA. The opposing group rallied behind banners defending sanctuary protections. Police formed barriers between the factions as chants echoed across the plaza, two visions of America clashing in the aftermath of a single raid. The political divide reflected a broader national struggle. How far should the federal government reach into local affairs when public safety hangs in the balance Under President Donald Trump's administration in 2025, national security briefings framed fentanyl trafficking as a homeland threat equivalent to strategic sabotage. DHS officials emphasized that the death toll rivaled wartime casualty numbers. And yet the debate inside Seattle captured something more fragile: the tension between freedom and control, between civil liberties, and the need to stop an industrial-scale threat operating inside American borders. Local police quietly admitted that overdose calls were consuming their resources, leaving little bandwidth for long-term investigations. Federal authorities argued that the frontier of national security had moved inward. The cartels no longer needed to cross deserts or tunnels. They were using the US economy itself as their delivery system. The result was a city torn between two imperatives: maintaining its identity as a sanctuary and defending itself from an invisible war waged through shipping manifests and mislabeled cargo. And amid all this, ordinary families carried the heaviest burden. Parents grieving lost children, teachers attending funerals for students who never reached graduation, first responders witnessing scenes that defied comprehension. Every seized barrel of fentanyl represented millions of potential tragedies, a chemical force capable of wiping out neighborhoods, schools, or entire communities. As investigators reviewed evidence and politicians traded accusations, a haunting question settled over the region. If one cartel could cause this much devastation from a single disguised supply chain, how many more families across America are already living on the edge of the next unseen catastrophe? The morning after the raid, Washington, D.C. moved with unusual speed. Dawn had barely touched the Potomac when senior officials from the Department of Homeland Security, the Justice Department, and U.S. Treasury convened an emergency briefing. What happened in Seattle was no longer viewed as a regional crime. It was a strategic breach of American infrastructure. According to Reuters sources inside DHS, the Trump administration immediately ordered an expansion of Operation Take Back America across the entire West Coast. The directive was unambiguous. The cartels had moved inside the U.S. supply chain, and the response had to match the scale of the threat. Within hours, state task forces were activated from San Diego to Portland. Oregon investigators began tracing shell companies operating quietly around the port of Portland. Idaho focused on trucks crossing a lightly monitored highway corridor long considered low risk. California, already burdened by sprawling cartel activity in Los Angeles, and the Inland Empire activated its fusion centers, 24-hour intelligence hubs designed to track criminal networks in real time. For the first time in decades, federal agents, state police cyber units, and financial crime analysts worked under a unified command structure. The findings that followed stunned even veteran officials. According to internal documents later summarized by The Guardian, 12 U.S. registered trucking companies, all seemingly legitimate, had partial investment from shell corporations in Sinaloa and Jalisco. None of these companies existed before 2022. Their revenue streams were clean, their tax filings were in order, their drivers held valid commercial licenses, but financial tracing revealed their seed capital originated from offshore accounts tied to narcotics revenue. These firms served as laundering shields and logistical camouflage, creating a legal facade for illicit shipments moving across interstate highways. The U.S. Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, reported a surge of unexplained capital flowing into small transport and warehouse firms from 2023 to 2024. Al Jazeera and DW analysts later described this pattern as commercial infiltration, a strategy that blurred the line between legitimate markets and organized crime. Cartels weren't just selling drugs anymore. They were embedding themselves inside the American economy, manipulating freight schedules, warehousing cycles, and inventory systems with corporate precision. Strategically, this changed everything. What once resembled a criminal supply chain now looked like economic subversion, a method used by transnational actors to destabilize institutions from within. Intelligence officials compared the cartel structure to foreign influence operations, entities that gain power not through open confrontation, but through hidden control of key infrastructure. This raised new national security fears. If narcotics networks had already mastered U.S. freight and financial systems, how long before those pathways were exploited for weapons, foreign intelligence assets, or coercive economic leverage? On the ground, the numbers reflected the urgency. 19 suspects arrested, 37 federal indictments, more than 4,000 100,000 pounds of meth, hundreds of pounds of fentanyl, and dozens of firearms seized. According to a Justice Department report confirmed by BBC News, the fentanyl alone carried enough lethal potential to kill nearly 7 million people, almost the entire population of Washington state. And yet behind the data looms something larger, the erosion of trust in America's own logistical backbone. If the nation's ports, highways, and freight terminals could be silently weaponized by a foreign criminal enterprise, then the fight was no longer about drugs. It was about sovereignty, about who controls the arteries of a global power, about whether freedom of commerce could still coexist with the security demands of a rapidly evolving threat landscape. For millions of Americans, the revelation was unsettling. Every passing semi-truck, every warehouse humming after midnight, every container offloaded from foreign ports. They no longer represented just commerce, they represented uncertainty, a hidden battlefield woven into the fabric of everyday life. And so another question rose to the surface, one that policymakers in DC could not ignore. If the cartels have already infiltrated America's economy at this depth, how far will they reach before the nation redefines what security must truly mean? By the time federal trucks rolled away from Seattle's warehouse district, a sobering truth had settled over the nation. The front line of America's security was no longer at the border. It was embedded inside the country's own systems. The Sinaloa network had exposed something deeper than narcotics trafficking. It revealed a shadow war unfolding within U.S. infrastructure, where supply chains, financial systems, and ordinary commerce had become the battlefield. The question that echoed through federal briefings was chilling. If a cartel can infiltrate America this deeply, who else is watching and waiting? Analysts from Reuters, DW, and The Guardian emphasized that the cartel's model looked less like crime and more like covert strategic warfare. The operation mimicked the behavior of hostile state actors, layered shell companies, encrypted financial transfers, corporate-style redundancies, and the ability to move lethal material across 48 states without detection. Intelligence officials warned the Trump administration that this was no longer drug trafficking. It was system penetration, a tactic capable of destabilizing critical infrastructure from within. If synthetic opioids could pass unnoticed through ports, what else could be hidden inside the flow of global commerce? As the implications widened, the US found itself confronting a troubling reality. The cartels had not only built a distribution network, they had built influence inside the logistics arteries of a global superpower. Their operations exploited the very strengths that made America an economic engine open: markets, high-volume trade, decentralized transportation, and trust in commercial systems. Every truck on Interstate 5, every cargo container lifted onto a rail line, every after-hours warehouse shift now carried the shadow of doubt. The battlefield had become invisible, and the enemy had mastered the art of disguise. Strategically, this forced the nation to reconsider its definition of security. Freedom of movement, local autonomy, and the privacy of commercial enterprises had long been cornerstones of American life. But the Seattle operation exposed the cost of those freedoms when exploited by transnational criminal networks. Lawmakers debated whether broader federal oversight was necessary, while civil rights groups warned about the dangers of federal overreach. The balance between liberty and protection, already strained in recent years, tightened further as new threat assessments circulated through Washington. For communities across the country, the human impact grew heavier with each revealed detail. Every counterfeit pill traced to the cartel's pipeline represented a life cut short. Every corrupted freight company signaled jobs, families, and neighborhoods unknowingly tied to a system of destruction. And every warehouse seized during coordinated raids represented a place where danger had blended seamlessly into the ordinary hum of American commerce. In this new landscape, danger did not come loudly. It arrived as a shipping manifest, a delivery truck, a piece of paper stamped domestic freight. As federal investigators unraveled the national blueprint discovered in Seattle, a map linking dozens of American cities to cartel distribution hubs, one fear became impossible to ignore. Seattle might not have been the end of the network. It might only have been the first city to fall under the spotlight. Across the country, ports, rail yards, trucking hubs, and warehouse districts now face the same uncomfortable question. If a criminal empire could hide inside one of America's busiest trade regions, what other cities have already been compromised without a single alarm sounding? The Seattle raid marked more than the destruction of a cartel pipeline. It exposed a silent infiltration of American infrastructure. Over 18 months, federal investigators uncovered a corporate-style logistics empire run by Sinaloa-linked operatives who embedded themselves inside legitimate trade routes, freight companies, and financial systems. Their network reached from Mexico's Pacific coast to U.S. ports, rail hubs, and interstate highways, moving over 4,000 pounds of methamphetamine and hundreds of pounds of fentanyl with near-total invisibility. What shocked federal authorities was the structure shell companies with tax records, temperature-controlled containers, clean driver credentials, and cryptocurrency-based laundering routes spanning Hong Kong, Panama, and Canada. Defense analysts noted that the operation resembled intelligence tradecraft, not traditional crime-raising fears of systemic vulnerability across U.S. commerce. The raid intensified political conflict inside Seattle, where sanctuary city policies clashed with federal security demands amid record fentanyl deaths. Nationally, President Donald Trump's administration expanded Operation Take Back America across the West Coast, uncovering cartel-linked investments in American trucking and warehouse firms. As investigators mapped the network's reach across 48 states, one warning became impossible to ignore: if a cartel could build an empire inside the U.S.'s supply chain, the next breach may already be underway, hidden in plain sight.